Welcome to the Supply Chain Pioneers podcast, where we highlight industry leaders on the forefront of innovation and technology in planning, procurement, and logistics. Hosted by your supply chain pro to know, Ulf Venne.
Welcome back to Supply Chain Pioneers. This week we have David Shillingford. He's a supply chain technology expert, an advisor, an entrepreneur, and also an investor. In addition to all of that, he's a passionate gardener. You will hear more about this at the end of the episode. He's a very interesting character. You will like his story. He started in the military, then went into the insurance world, and from there had an outside-in view of supply chain and understood that data and analytics is missing here to manage risks properly. And that is how he built a thesis, worked together with investors, and founded a company around that. Super interesting story, and I hope you enjoy it. Hello, everybody, and welcome to a new episode of Supply Chain Pioneers. And today I have my good friend David Shillingford with me. Welcome, David.
Hey, Ulf. Great to be here.
David is a great pioneer in supply chain, and he really came from outside, looked at what we did here, and understood that data and analytics is a really important part of the business. Today we want to talk about this story. And we'll start with a short introduction, David. You want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. So, David Shillingford, I've had what you might call a fairly non-linear career. Started off in the British Army, then was in New York with a firm that was recovering stolen art. Then got involved in a few data and analytics startups, worked for a large data analytics company that acquired one of those companies. And for the last 5 to 10 years, I've been working in the area of supply chain analytics.
Yeah. So essentially you got from the British Army to stolen art to data analytics and then to supply chain. So my question is, when did you realize supply chain is going to be what you want to focus on? How did that happen?
So I don't think there was ever really a point where that was it was a deliberate decision. I think I can kind of look back on it and find some threads that connect my bizarre journey, which generally is risk using data and intelligence and analytics. And really everything I have done, even if it doesn't sound much like that, has had those components as part of it. And you can choose, I think, any career. What really underpins it is the people and the different people that have been instrumental in making things happen that I've been involved in, and the relationships that I've built over the years.
Actually, one of the key, as you said, focus points is analytics. And at one point, you looked at this very complex puzzle that is supply chain management, and you thought to yourself, data and analytics is really missing here to be better in what is happening on a daily basis. What was your thought process?
Well, as you say, I was kind of an outsider. I wasn't a supply chain professional my whole career. And it really started with what we were doing with insurance companies in some of our previous companies, and that they were talking about supply chain risk and the opportunity that they saw to deploy more capital in transferring supply chain risk from large corporations into the insurance industry. And that project got us to a point where we realized relatively quickly that the insurance companies didn't have the data that was necessary to do that. And so we went to the insurance brokers. They didn't have the data. We went to the companies themselves. And it was at that point that we discovered that even they didn't have the data, or at least they didn't have the data in one place or in a way that would be meaningful to be able to describe their supply chain, which to an outsider was kind of a bit of a surprise. And as we learned more about them and got to know them and started talking to them about some of the things that the insurance industry did to measure and predict risk, there seemed to be an opportunity to bring certain elements of traditional risk management into supply chains to really on day one not be about insurance or transferring risk, but actually to help companies manage and plan their supply chains more effectively. So that was really kind of how we got into thinking about this problem.
Instead of looking at insurance as the last option, looking at business continuity first from a vantage point of an insurer onto supply chain, which is quite interesting. So at one point you decided we need a company for that, right? An analytics company that focuses on supply chain risk. And you went out and you found an investor to help you fulfill that mission and vision. How hard was the process of convincing them to buy into your idea?
Well, it was hard and then it wasn't. And I'll explain what I mean by that, because I spoke to a number of venture capital companies about this idea of just the observation that there were a few small companies that had started this journey towards creating supply chain risk analytics, and that it was probably a case of trying to acquire more than one of them and bring them together that would get someone there the fastest. But it was really not the way that venture capital companies traditionally think in terms of a roll-up. And for the private equity companies that I spoke to, it was really too small. It became, and that was hard. And then I just went around in circles. It became easier when I was introduced to Columbia Capital, because they take a different view. It's really not the traditional VC or PE approach. It's much more a sort of, well, if the idea is big enough, let's just start and go down the journey and lead as many rounds as we need to help the operators, the entrepreneurs get there. And so then it was me and others and Columbia sitting around the table working out how to do this and how to do the thesis. So it wasn't me sending a pitch deck to a VC. It was me and others sitting around the table with Columbia Capital working out how to do it. So once we went down the path, it was everyone's idea. It wasn't, one person had persuaded someone else that this was a good idea. We all thought it was a good idea.
That's great. So now I want to pivot a little bit into more the data and analytics portion, because you're an expert in that topic from many different areas. The first time I saw you already talked a lot about actionable insights and that being a key consideration for companies in the future. So I'm not sure everybody has heard of actionable insights. So could you maybe explain that a little bit, and also why you think this is so important for supply chains in the future?
Yeah, sure. It's not that I kind of thought it up or invented it, but it's a phrase that I like to use whenever I can, as you observe, because without action, insights have no value. And the point of an insight is to inform a decision, and the decision results in an action. So if it's just insights, and of course people as a shorthand, they say insights, and what they really mean is actionable insights. But I think it's important to say that out loud, because the process has to start with the desired outcome. And the desired outcome is, in a supply chain where physical goods are being moved, it's going to require somebody to do something in the physical world. And quite often that's the challenge. There's a gap between the reality of that and what that takes, and whoever it is that's creating the insight. And if you can't connect the two, you can't take action. And without that, there's little to no value in the insights.
Quick follow-up question on that. In your time in the military, I think they try to get as much information and therefore insight as they can, but they also always look to action on that, right? And is that something that kind of, for you, did that essentially shape your mind into that, as thinking in this direction all the time?
So I think to some extent, and as I said earlier, this idea of actionable insights and intelligence and risk has been a theme throughout what would otherwise look like a pretty random career. And yeah, for sure, in the military, it's always about data. It's always about intelligence, and it's always about taking action. And you're always acting on imperfect intelligence. That's fundamentally that's what a decision is. A decision is doing something based on imperfect knowledge of the situation, and being able to do something faster than the person next to you or the person that you're opposed to is critical. And it's lessons like that play out in supply chain. There's a lot of fantastic supply chain leaders who are ex-military, and that's one of the things they take with them, is just the ability to make a decision quickly or at the right time without necessarily all of the information. And being able to act faster than your competition in supply chains is a significant source of competitive advantage.
Yeah. So moving to the next level, AI. which is now the topic everybody's talking about. We see that people are looking at AI and thinking, okay, what could be the role there in supply chain management? You already are considering that for quite a long time, so it would be good to get your take on what role will AI play in the future?
Great question. And yeah, as you say, it's on everyone's lips at the moment. And that was part of the original thesis. We believed AI was already starting to impact certain industries and certain functions. And part of the thesis was that you need that type of advanced analytics to be able to understand the complexities of supply chains and the complexity of risk, and to be able to bring the two together to make decisions, to simplify decisions that would otherwise be impossible for humans to get their heads around. And I think there's an enormous amount of opportunity in and around supply chain, where there's enormous amounts of data, enormous amounts of complexities that come out of the various dependencies that AI can help to simplify, so that we can start to get insights that are actionable out of very, very large and sometimes, well, often messy sets of data. But at the other end, to be able to start to create insights that we trust enough to be able to automate certain processes. And that's an enormous opportunity in supply chain, because and one that companies can invest around, because if it takes a minute to do something that otherwise took 2 minutes, the ROI from that is relatively easy to understand.
Yeah. A good follow-up question here on the trust element. Do you think there's a huge opportunity also for companies to build out expertise in change management and supply chain? Because we see a lot of people leveraging consultants on that right now, but digitalization will just grow more and more into companies. So is that something that you see will be more insourced in the future?
But there's an enormous need for different types of consulting in supply chain. And I would say that whenever we look at a technology or a technology project that hasn't done what it was expected for it to do in a company or across an industry, it's generally not because the technology didn't work. It's generally because of how the technology was employed, and that the ecosystem that technology was being brought into wasn't considered fully. Nobody started by saying, well, why are we doing this? What are the challenges? What needs to change that may be hard to change? And anything that humans did yesterday that needs to be different tomorrow, particularly if it's being done as a group of people, is very difficult. So I think there's opportunity for advice and expertise, whether it comes internally or externally, for companies to really improve their approach to digitization by bringing in that kind of expertise in the right way at the right times.
Next question, provocative question. Will AI take away jobs in supply chain management?
Well, I mean, the short answer is yes, but a more optimistic spin on that is, but other jobs will be created, and the jobs that will be taken away are the jobs that people don't enjoy doing very much, because they're moving data from one spreadsheet to another or whatever they're doing, and that frees up somebody to do things that are more valuable and more interesting, and things that are much harder for computers to do, like dealing with other human beings. So the automation really shouldn't be thought of as replacing humans, but it should be thought of as enabling humans and allowing people to do more interesting and more valuable jobs, so that there's more human interaction between, say, an OEM and a supplier rather than less. So people are taken out of that data crunching that at the moment takes up so many hours, and people aren't talking to each other. And they can start talking to each other again, because these processes can be automated and taken out. So I'm excited about that, and it's going to be a bumpy journey. It's going to be tough. That replacement doesn't happen synchronously, but that's where I believe we're going to end up.
Couldn't agree more. want to shift a little bit to right now. You're now an advisor to companies in the field of supply chain management digitalization. What are companies that you're looking at right now with the lens of the advisor that make you really excited for the future of supply chain management? What are some of these cool technologies out there?
So I think the problem with that question is that what I think is cool doesn't sound very cool. I think that the things that I'm excited about are really just very, very basic things, but without them or without getting them right, nothing else is going to work as well as it should. And so, AI and blockchain and virtual reality and augmented reality, those are great things that have huge potential. But if you don't have the different systems that a company uses connected to each other in the right way, for example, then that's everything else you try and do is going to be substandard. So any company or any technology that is helping disparate systems be better connected together and to do that more easily, I'm excited about that. I'm also excited, or I'm rather I'm concerned about the drive towards digitization and automation without thought for the infrastructure that has to sit underneath that. So if you think about the digital warehouse, everybody we spoke to at ProMat this year about all the amazing robots that were on display came down to, but none of this is going to work with the type of cabling we've got in our warehouses at the moment, which again is very, it's not very cool, but it's fundamental. And without the right type of DC microgrids and fiber optic cabling networks in warehouses and DCs and fulfillment centers, the type of automation that companies are betting their future on isn't going to work, or it's not going to work well or be optimized. So that's an area that I'm very interested in, where companies can quickly retrofit a facility so that they can have direct current DC microgrids. That helps with energy transition, it helps with sustainability, and to have fiber optic cabling so that they can scale into whatever level of automation that they need. But that's, of the, I don't know, however many thousand booths that we saw at ProMat, there was not a single booth that was doing that. So those are the kind of things that I'm excited about, and they sit beneath the surface a little bit, and then we think about those types of things in from a vertical sense. And a lot of money and effort has been put into in-transit visibility and things that connect to that. I think the biggest opportunity is more where there is a transfer at the nodes, if you will, whether it's a yard or a warehouse or a port, because that's really where things are going wrong. It's where there is asynchronous activity. It's where the ball gets dropped, if you will, and it's generally where two systems need to talk to each other, where they're not. So those are the types of things that you can look at ports, and you can look at warehouses and industrial clusters, and there's a lot of opportunity around that. So we're talking to a lot of companies that are involved in those types of activities, that maybe a level or two underneath the work that companies like Everstream Analytics are doing.
So essentially, every time the good gets touched, right, physically, that's also where there's the most danger for the good itself. That's in a warehouse, right, in a DC, in a port. That makes a lot of sense. I've seen it a lot of times, actually, that these were neuralgic points for shipment to go wrong. So we now see there are a lot of solutions. There's a lot of exciting things. Maybe some are more foundational and infrastructural that people can be excited about, but there are a lot of solutions out there in the market. You have scouted a lot of these in the past few weeks and months and years. If you now would be in an operational role as a professional, and you get the task of leveraging some of these technologies and make them interact with each other and build an IT strategy around that, what would be your advice?
So I maybe repeating a couple of things that I said.
Yeah.
First is to start with why. Why am I doing this? What is the outcome that I desire? And then to work backwards from there through the physical actions that need to be taken or need to be improved. And then the insights. What are the insights that I need, or the automation that I desire? And to be thinking then about, well, what are the solutions that would best fit that based upon my environment and ecosystem? And then I'm going out and I'm talking to my peers to find out what they're doing, either those who haven't done it yet or thinking about it or have done it and they are a year, 2 years, 3 years into the journey. And that's a really important part of that. And then just to have the right type of conversation with the solution provider, who they're going to be selling, and really sort of bring them in as much as you can as a partner to have that difficult discussion, a year before you go live rather than a year after you go live. And it's a difficult thing. It's a difficult thing to make happen because someone's selling and someone's buying. But at the end of the day, it's better for both parties if that level of candor can be before rather than after the sale.
Moving again topics, I want to talk with you quickly about Pegasus Bridge, which is your company where you help military professionals join business and business environment. So what can companies, and especially supply chain, benefit from if they hire somebody out of the military world?
Yeah, well, thanks for asking about that. And calling it a company, maybe overselling a little bit. But whenever I can find time to help somebody who's leaving the military make that sometimes very difficult transition, I will make the time. And it's not just to help them; it's actually to help the employers as well, because there are a ton of things that employers can benefit from by hiring people from the military. And not everyone in the world is there are some people who are amazing from the military, and there are some people who are not as amazing. So I'll start there. But if I generalize a little bit, I would say that when you look at a company and what a company sort of says publicly about the things that matter to them, they're generally going to talk about things that don't require a ton of training or skill or talent or industry knowledge. They're going to talk about values. They're going to talk about showing up on time. They're going to talk about knowing how to work with other people in a team. And it's those types of things that I think people come out of the military with an innate sense that that's a better way of getting from here to there. And I think it's good to talk about that in a very sort of, not what we call it, not the label, not to necessarily call it leadership or something like that, because people think of different things when you use those words, but to be very specific about the ability to work with others and acknowledge that there are very, very few things that are done better alone than with the help of other people. And it's things like that people leave the military with a very strong sense of. Everybody I know who's hired from the military has been pleased about that. But you need to acknowledge that the people leaving the military are coming into a very, very different world, and you got to give them time to adapt, and you got to work with them to adapt. But it's definitely worth that process.
Yeah, and there's a lot of experience, I feel, that especially if it comes to topics like supply chain risk management, something I'm passionate about, understanding how to operate and work in a crisis, even if it's, different types of crises, obviously, right? But staying calm, collected, and being rational about your decisions in these kinds of situations is something that I think is very valuable, actually. And we see that in security departments all over the world, right? Where people coming from military are hired exactly for that purpose, because they have the ability to stay calm and collected in these situations.
Yep, that's very true. it's very hard to stay calm in your first crisis. But better to hire someone who's already been through that a few times.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so I will call you now a tech visionary, and I truly believe that. So my last supply chain question is, what makes you excited for the future of supply chain, especially in the next 5 to 10 years?
Well, that's a very generous description, and I think that augmented reality and robotics, and I think there's a lot of very, very cool technologies out there that over time will allow us to run supply chains very differently. I was with a company in the UK this summer, and it's a small, a few hundred people, family business, but they've invested in robotics, and it's a remarkable story because they are now a global company who can manufacture wherever their clients happen to be. And I use that as an example because the thing that I'm most excited about or most optimistic about is this idea of shrinking supply chains, and to do that both geographically, this idea of regionalization. Let's make things as close as we can to the client, and at the same time thinking really, really seriously about circularity, because we cannot create sustainable ecosystems. We can't create sustainable supply chains without genuine circularity. Unless the world's population decreases significantly, it's just net can't happen. And so I think a lot of the technologies that I see on the horizon will allow us to create more circular supply chains. But it's gonna require as much a change in us as individuals and as communities and as businesses and as politicians. It has to be, all of the above and more to make what is a very, very significant transition from a use and throw away to a circular ecosystem. But I believe it'll happen because it has to. And that might not be a technology, but it's a range of technologies that enable us to get from here to there.
Yeah. Oh, that's really good. Okay. I have one last question for today. And that is because I know that you and your wife are both passionate about gardening, as am I. So my question,
she is.
Yeah, but you do talk about it as well a lot with a lot of passion. So what for you?
Okay.
What for you would be a similarity between gardening and supply chain management?
Apart from doing what you're told to do, no, I think. So I think when I think about gardening, and by the way, I am into it. It's taken me a few years to get there, but I'm into it now. It's fascinating because sort of it's where man meets nature, and there's this sort of dance between nature's doing this bit and you're doing this bit. You've got to find the right balance, because if you don't, things go badly. And I think it's the same with supply chains, and you particularly when you think about supply chain risk management, you got to respect nature in terms of what it does to supply chains, and how we have to think more about how we interact with nature as supply chain professionals. And I mean, that's the ultimate sort of localization, regionalization, is growing your own food. Imagine how the world's ecosystem would be if everyone grew their own food, or there was a farm or a garden in every school or something like that. And I'd love to see more of that.
That was a very good answer. I'm very impressed. Okay. Thank you so much, David, for today and taking the time talking with me on my podcast. I really appreciate it.
Oh, it's my pleasure. It's I think it's great that you're doing this. I've loved the other podcasts, and it was great to chat.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And now I wish everybody a nice day. We'll be back with a new episode very soon, but for now, bye-bye.
This was Supply Chain Pioneers. Thanks for watching, listening, or however you are enjoying this podcast. You can find Supply Chain Pioneers on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, all other major podcast players, as well as on YouTube at Ulf Talks Supply Chain. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment. See you next time.